Wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador Haley. I know you've managed to bring about half of Washington's press corps here, and I see they're ready to ask questions. But before they do, I get to ask you a couple.
Great.
So I want to begin because this is a particularly interesting time in Washington. We're seeing the Biden regime really shift for the first time from what is 2 years where they weren't engaging that much with Beijing to now, I think, the beginning of a series of visits. As you mentioned, we just had the Secretary of State go to Beijing. Now it seems that Treasury Secretary Yellen and perhaps the climate envoy John Kerry are going to go in the next couple of weeks or months as well. So the argument the Biden team makes is that we have to engage to prevent conflict. Of course, critics have claimed that this is not indeed what's going on, that this is perhaps talk for talk's sake. So you've been ambassador to the United Nations, you've negotiated with the Chinese. I want to hear a little bit about how you think about the purpose of negotiating with an adversary, with China. What do you think we should be thinking about getting out of these conversations from a strategic perspective?
I don't mind that Secretary Blinken went to China. We should always keep that communication going when we're dealing with our enemies. It's the way they're doing it. It's showing that America's running scared from China. That's what turns my stomach. The idea that Secretary Yellen said we should look for more ways to economically tie ourselves with China, that's ludicrous. And the idea that John Kerry wants to go make a climate deal with China so that we can be friends, that's not acknowledging the priorities that we need to be dealing with. They should be asking, why are you trying to start war? Why are you being aggressive in terms of in terms of a spy center on Cuba? Why are you stealing our intellectual property at $600 billion a year? Why are you building up your naval fleet? Why are you buying U.S. soil that happens to be near our military, most sensitive military installations? There's a lot of questions we should be asking. Why are you allowing fentanyl to come across the American border? There are multiple things Blinken could have talked about. And he didn't. Instead, he sat there, and you can look at the picture and let President Xi scold us. That's not showing American strength. American strength is when you tell countries what we expect of them. You're not reactionary to how they act. China's scolding us because they can. We have to make sure we do. When I was at the United Nations, I very much told countries what America was for and what America was against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. We have to shift that. Biden's not doing it. They're asleep at the wheel. They're looking more for appeasement than they are looking for strength. And that's a mistake because that's incredibly dangerous for America and our allies.
And I do think, as you've mentioned, the area where the Chinese seem least interested in engaging is, in fact, the military-to-military area, which is the one that the administration, I think, most wants. They want some form of guardrail, but that's the one they don't seem to be getting.
Well, and think about that. The fact that the Chinese refused to answer our defense call, I mean, if that's not disrespect, and if that shows they're not in any way worried about us, it's that. I mean, that's a big deal when a country's Department of Defense doesn't answer another country's Department of Defense. That tells you everything you need to know. And that's why Biden needs to stop pandering, and he needs to start being aggressive and strong in how we deal with China.
Great. I want to shift a little bit to allies and partners, which is something you talk about a lot and you talked about here today. And we have some of our ally and partner ambassadors in the room, so I know they share interest in your comments on this. So when you think about alliances and partnerships, you've always talked about them being pretty central to the China competition. I always hear two critiques of the United States from our friends. The first is that they want the U.S. to push back hard against China in certain areas, and they're willing to go along with that, but they might want us to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. The second thing you hear a lot is that the U.S. just doesn't have an economic game plan. We don't seem to have a trade strategy. I think that's true of this administration and to some extent of the last one. And so I'm wondering, how would you think about this going forward? How do you get allies and partners along to make the most robust coalition to shape Chinese behavior over the next few years?
Our allies told me the same thing at the United Nations when I was raising a ruckus about Nord Stream. When we saw that the Europeans were completely caving to Russia, especially Germany. And we said, don't do it. You never want to be dependent on an enemy. If there's ever a lesson we should learn with China, look at what happened with Russia. If you don't think the Chinese will pull the rug out from under us anytime they want, and if you don't think that's going to put the U.S. in a bind, then you're incredibly naive. That's the problem, is we have to, instead of sitting there and listening to what our allies want us to say, we should truly treat our allies as the friends they are and give them all the warnings that we know are out there. We want them to be as protected as we do. We need more friends. I mean, look at what happened. Biden goes and basically calls Saudi Arabia a pariah. Now, MBS is going to outlive every leader. He's young. You called him a pariah, and what did you do? You sent him to China. We need the Arab countries to be with us, not China. And my guess is they would rather be with us than China. The problem is our allies don't know what we're doing. A lot of that happened after Afghanistan. I mean, the idea that we left Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. The British ambassadors here, the UK, we didn't even tell them we were leaving in the middle of the night. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what it told our enemies. These countries need to trust that we know what we're doing. And we're not showing that. We're not showing economic strength in a way that we have trade proposals. We're not showing military strength in the way that we're building up our military. We're not showing any sort of strength in terms of challenging our adversaries. We have to start showing what we're doing, because I know when America speaks, the world listens. When America acts, the world follows. Who we are, the world wants to be. But we have to know who we are. And America's not showing that right now.
I want to squeeze one last question in before we come to the audience, which is about something you talked about in your remarks, Ukraine. There's a big debate on this within conservative circles about whether the United States can both address the Russia challenge and the China challenge at the same time. You've written about this, as you did today in the Wall Street Journal, and you've written op-eds about this before for them. When you look at the Russia and the China challenge, can you explain a little bit about how you think the U.S. can address both of them at the same time, right? There are some critics who say, well, the U.S. just can't help Ukraine anymore. It has to shift entirely to the China problem. How do you see this?
We can bounce multiple balls at the same time. And if we can't, God help us. But we can do that. But you have to see the correlation of China and Russia to start with. First of all, credit where credit's due. Look at the Ukrainians. Russia goes in and invades their country. They're so passionate, and they have the will to defend their country, that the men go straight to the front lines to fight for their country. The women say, we're not staying back. They make Molotov cocktails to help their husbands. Everybody gave Ukraine 5 days. And look at the passion and the will they've had to fight. Russia has fallen to its lowest point. We knew that because they were getting drones from Iran and missiles from North Korea. They raised the draft age in Russia to 65. We've seen how bad they have struggled. This weekend showed further cracks in what happens. You know, it's interesting. If you take a dictator who thinks he's invincible and he suddenly finds out he's not, it's a pretty eye-opening moment for not just Putin, but for all of the Russians and for their allies. So this is an opportunity to see that. But you look at the weakness of what they had. You look at the fact that Russia took 27% of Ukraine, and now Ukraine has taken so much back that they're down to 12%. So that's the side of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the passion and the will. Now remember, dictators tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're very transparent. China said they were going to take Hong Kong. They did. Russia said they were going to invade Ukraine. We watched it. China said Taiwan is next. We better believe them. Russia said that after Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That leads us to a world war. That's what we're trying to prevent. And before the Olympics, what did we see? China and Russia hold hands and name themselves unlimited partners before the world. And then you went and you had a Russian plane knock down an American drone. Interesting. President Xi shows up in Russia. Make no mistake, a win for Russia is a win for China. But if Ukraine wins, it sends a message to China about Taiwan. It sends a message to North Korea about testing ballistic missiles. It sends a message to Iran about building a bomb. What we need to do is make sure that we work with our allies and give them the equipment and the ammunition to win. After this weakness over the weekend, Biden should be on the phone. They should be making sure Ukraine has everything, because this is a massive opportunity right now. While Putin is distracted and unstable, this is the time that Ukraine should move. And we have to make sure that we're doing that. Unfortunately, I don't think Biden's going to be there.
Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up. So I already see a number of hands. We're going to bring mics around. If you will, just introduce yourself. And I see back there in the orange, Kylie from CNN. We'll get a mic over to you.
You want to hold it? Okay. Thank you for doing this, Ambassador. It's a very useful conversation, having just traveled with the Secretary to China, so I appreciate it. I have two questions for you. One is China-related, and one is news of day. You said that the United States needs to be clear with China that an invasion of Taiwan would mean full economic decoupling. So I'm wondering if what you are calling for here is actually a holistic change in the policy that has historically been the U.S. policy for China regarding strategic ambiguity. Should the United States get rid of strategic ambiguity? And then my second question is, just last night, CNN was able to procure the actual tape of President Biden discussing classified documents at Bedminster and admitting that those documents had not been declassified before he was discussing them in a public setting. Should that tape disqualify him from running for president this time around and being president again? Thank you.
So your first question was about, you have to say the first question again, because I got thrown off by your second question. I'm sorry.
I think the question was...
Strategic ambiguity, should it be dead?
This is about preventing war. That's it. Forget all the other policies. This is about preventing war. This is about the fact that America has been asleep at the wheel. We have not paid attention to the Chinese infiltration into our higher education with U.S. police stations, buying up farmland, stealing intellectual property, putting a spy center out there, building up its military. We've got to start looking at the whole picture. And the best way to deter China from invading Taiwan is to make sure we have a strong military, that we let them know what we expect of them, that we form with our allies, and that we start to take these issues head on. I think everybody that wants to talk about, strategic ambiguity and war with Taiwan, that's the wrong thing to be looking at. What do we do to stop war? That should be our number one thing. What do we do to stop war? The way you stop war is you win in Ukraine. The way you stop war is you build up your military. The way you stop war is you let China know they have to sell all the farmland and make sure that they no longer infiltrate any of our technology companies. The way you do it is you let our businesses know, hey, if China pulls out the rug from you tomorrow, where are you going to be headed? We have to start that process. China will take notice. Those are the conversations we need to have. That's why we're saying there has to be a complete policy shift so that we can prevent war. In terms of the recording that's happened, we're going to let the courts play that out and do whatever. I have long said anybody that wants to run for president can run for president. I think that's for the people to decide.
All right. Dimitri from Financial Times, we'll get a mic to you.
Thank you. I'm Dimitri Sevastopoulos, US-China correspondent at the Financial Times. President Biden has said 4 times that he would order the US military to intervene if China attacked Taiwan. Do you agree that that's the right message to send? And then separately, when you've talked to voters on the campaign trail, do you think the American people are ready to support US military intervention to defend Taiwan against a Chinese attack?
Again, that's not what we should be talking about. It's not U.S. military intervention. It's what are we doing to prevent war. Biden, rather than sitting there, talking about whether it's going to be military or not, that's the wrong question. We need to let China know we're on to them. We need to let them know we're going to defend Taiwan by sending equipment, ammunition, and doing the training now. There's no bigger message that we could send to China than to strengthen Taiwan and work with our allies to make sure they do that. That's the biggest lesson of Ukraine. Biden sat around for a year waiting as Russia surrounded Ukraine and did nothing. We have a chance to do something. Let's get in front of the situation. Let's get with our allies. Let's strengthen Taiwan. Let's make China really see what would happen if they decided to invade. And the best way to do that is to show them what Ukraine is going to do to Russia. Let's finish it in Ukraine and win that territory back. And I promise you, China's not going to want to go against that alliance and have all of that happen. They're watching very carefully. China watched every company that left Russia. They watched every country that's helping Ukraine. They're watching all of the equipment, the ammunition that we're using. They're seeing where our sensitivities are. Let's not show them any. Let's show them that when we fight for a friend, we make sure that we give them all the ammunition, equipment, and skill they need to finish the job. I think the voters understand we want to prevent war. There's not a voter that will tell you they don't want to make sure we prevent war. That's why we don't talk about going to war. I'm the wife of a combat veteran. He's deployed right now. The last thing I want is my husband to go to war. So what I talk about every day is preventing war so that my husband doesn't have to go, preventing war so that our military never has to be in that situation. And that's why if you ask any military soldier, any military individual who's serving our country, they want the equipment, they want the ammunition, they want the training, they don't want gender pronoun classes, they don't want DEI, they want to focus on being the strongest and best military in the world. We need to give them the opportunity to do that.
There's some great polling data out from the Reagan Institute looking at exactly these questions, which I do think shows that there's a fair amount of support among the American public, not just on the Ukraine issue, but on Taiwan as well. Josh Rogan, I saw you had a question earlier, so over to you at the Washington Post.
Thank you. Actually, Dimitri took my question, but let me come up with one on the fly. Thank you, Ambassador.
Make it a good one.
Haley, okay, I'll try. Thank you for your time today and for your service.
Of course.
I was intrigued by the fact that you said that President Trump did too little about the rest of the Chinese threat. And you said, quote, he also showed moral weakness. Tell us a little bit more about that. Are you referring to the Hong Kong protesters as rioters? Are you referring to his telling Xi Jinping that concentration camps for Uyghurs was exactly the right thing to do? Are there other examples that you remember from your time?
Now, I gave the example. I mean, to me, the most glaring is you don't congratulate the Chinese Communist Party for taking over China 70 years ago. We don't congratulate communism. We condemn it. That's the moral clarity that I'm talking about. We have to know right from wrong. You never go and tell someone who's stealing, oh, you go get them. Someone who's oppressing people, oh, keep oppressing. You don't tell a dictator the way they sit there and hold their hand down on their people is a good thing. You congratulate freedom. You congratulate democracy. You congratulate when people have the individual liberties to do what they need to do. You never congratulate communism. And that, I think, sends a bad message to the world. What we say matters. Countries pay attention. Our enemies pay more attention. We have to be very responsible with those words.
Great. Okay, we'll get a couple more questions in here. Sir, right there. Yeah, perfect.
Hey, David Drucker with the Dispatch. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Two questions. One, along the parameters of when we talk, the world listens, and preventing war, would ending the one China policy and recognizing Taiwanese independence do that? Number one. Number two, you referenced China setting up shop in Cuba to spy on us. You become president in January 2025. What do you do about that?
First of all, when you talk about Taiwanese independence, they themselves haven't said they want to be independent. They haven't said they want to be an independent country. They just want to be left alone. So I don't think it's up to us to say what they should do. They have to say it first. They have to be the ones that say, Either, yes, we want to be an independent country, or no, we just want to be where we are. They've yet to say that. So we shouldn't jump in front of them and do it. So I think right now, the way we see it is they're democratic, they're free, and they like being left alone. And that's what we're trying to defend. They have to make that decision. You know, in terms of the second question you had was Cuba. So the spies, I mean, first of all, you can't have our biggest enemy literally on our doorstep. You can't have it. So China and Cuba both need to know they have to dismantle that and go. The more important, for me, concerning part of that spy center is not just that they're spying, but are they going to send military troops there? That's the biggest concern. Are they going to start doing training there? Are we going to actually have a military that's 100 miles away from us of our enemy? We have to make sure that they disband that. And China needs to know that is a clear threat. If they're going to go complain that we're in the Taiwan Strait, which is international waters, or that we're in the South China Sea where we're doing that, you sure as hell better bet that they can't go and put up a military installation that close to us and us not see it as a provocation. Look, if we have to, I've already said, when it comes to fentanyl, when it comes to things like this, if we have to end all normal trade practices with China, there's nothing more damaging to China than for us to do that. And our national security is worth it. It is worth doing whatever it takes to protect the American people. And if that means you're doing a full-on decoupling, that means you're doing a full-on decoupling because we have American lives to save. And I don't trust China with 1 ounce of anything they say or what they do in this process.
Ambassador, we just have time for, I think, one more question, so we'll switch over here in the back right there.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah. I can hear you.
Hi, Ambassador. I'm Zach Wise from the National Journal. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez said this morning he didn't seem to know who the Uyghurs were in China. What would you say to him about the importance of this issue?
Over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs sitting in China. They are making them change their name, change their religion, sexual abuse. I mean, genocide. We promise never again to look away from genocide. And it's happening right now in China. And no one is saying anything because they're too scared of China. Part of American foreign policy should always be that we fight for human rights for all people. And what's happening with the Uyghurs is disgusting. And the fact that the whole world is ignoring it is shameful.
Can I ask just one final quick question on that, which is an issue you've talked a lot about is human rights consistently for years. And, there's a challenge, which is we can talk a lot about human rights, but it's not clear how much of an effect we're having. So how do you think about trying to actually change Chinese behavior in an area like this where we can't physically go in and force them to adjust what they're doing?
Don't underestimate the strength of the American voice. I mean, I saw that at the United Nations. You don't have to go fight a war. You don't have to go put sanctions. Sometimes humiliating a country and getting other countries to join is enough to move that behavior. And we saw that. China never likes to be called out. So if we and our allies seriously called out what was happening with the Uyghurs, they would throw a temper tantrum, but then they would figure out how they needed to change what they're doing. We should always speak out. We can't always say it's human rights or nothing, but we can't never not talk about the abuses that are happening around the world. Every living person deserves to have the freedoms and the safety as an individual. And America, that's what makes us great, is the fact that we're willing to call out anyone that is not treating an individual with the respect they deserve.
Well, Ambassador Haley, thank you so much for your comments today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we hope you will join us for future New China Playbook events. We'll have those coming up soon. But Ambassador Haley, thank you so much.